Hi, welcome to a bonus episode of Beyond the Basics. This one we're taking a little trip down when will I ever use this lane. I am Sheila Hansen, your host of the Beyond the Basics series and retired math teacher. I put a post on my Facebook page asking my followers, when do you ever use negative numbers in your job or in your life or in your hobby? The following are people who responded to my request. Each one of them has a different situation in which negative numbers can be used. First one is from David, who is a physicist. David writes, as a professional physicist, we set reference frames all the time. Negative numbers are used all the time to express a relative position or value corresponding to that reference frame. For example, if two forces are occurring against each other, one would be negative with respect to the other. If they are equal forces, then the sum is zero and nothing happens. Alternatively, I deal with image processing a lot, and a rotation of an image requires the pixels have a positive or negative values in the reference frame to rotate about. Those are two simple examples that may be interesting, and yes, David, they are interesting. This example is for the first frame of reference that David gives. So here we have two opposing forces. They are equally opposing forces, so you have a positive 30 and you have a negative 30. And so the resulting position from zero will be, we have to combine the two, we add the two together and you get zero, meaning that the position stays at zero. Well, here's another one. In this one, we have a force of positive 20 and an opposing force of negative 40. You add those together, you end up with a negative 20, meaning that your position, your new position, is going to be 20 units before or under zero. Here's another one. Your force is 40, your opposing force is negative 20. So when you add those two together, you get a resulting force of positive 20. Thus, your position from zero is going to be 20 units either after or above zero. The rotational forces that David was talking about is like clockwise and counterclockwise and positive and negative in that way. Our next contributor is Sarah. She's a research grant manager, and she writes, I manage cancer research grants, mainly the financials and the reporting. We pretty regularly have negative numbers and even strive for them slightly because it means we aren't sending money back to sponsors. Here I've made a simple example of what this might look like. So you have the grant, which is money that people request donated. And then you have the money that was spent from the grant, and then you have the balance, the remaining. So the grant, sponsor X granted $100. So somebody donates $100 to cancer research. The amount of sponsor X grant needed was $150. So the balance you subtract, 100 minus 150 is negative 50. Thus they were actually short $50. But they used all of the $100 that was donated. Here's another example. Sponsor Y grants $100. Sponsor Y grant that is used is $50. So we have 100 minus 50, and we have a balance of positive 50. Anything that is left over from these research grants then gets sent back to the sponsor. So $50 is sent back to sponsor Y. Cheryl is a retired teacher, and she says golf scores involve negatives, and she's quite right. Although my golf score is never negative, although I haven't played since this one guy in college tried to teach me and gave it up for lost. So par on a golf course means this is how many times you should have to hit the ball in order to get it in the hole. So if it's a par 3 hole, you should be able to hit the ball into the hole in 3 strokes. I hit the ball 3 times and I get it in the hole. So I had 3 strokes, and you subtract the strokes from the par, and I had a score of 0. Yay! You made it in par 3. Shh! Next time I hit this hole, I have some crazy hits happen to the ball, and I make it in 4 strokes. Again, you subtract par from the strokes, and I get a positive 1. That's what my friend called a bogey, meaning it took me more times to hit the ball than it should have. So I have a positive score. That's not a good thing in golf because you want to be able to hit it in fewer strokes than they say is necessary. That means you're better. I try this hole again, and this time I get it in 2 hits of the ball. So I have 2 strokes. I subtract par from my 2 strokes. My score is a -1. That's what my friend called a birdie. Birdie is good because I took fewer times to hit the ball to get it in the hole. Yay! Shh! And then you total your score from each hole and you get your total score for the game. My score is 0. Yay! Shh! Julie writes, my checkbook when I have spent more money than what was in my checking account. A checkbook is basically where you write down what you spend out of your checking account so that way you know what's left. These days, it's done on computer. So you log into your account and you see these transactions. Payday. Yeah. They add that money to whatever balance was in my bank account before. So I'm like, yeah, I'm rolling in the money. I'm going to go get me something to eat. Get me some Chick-fil-A. That money is subtracted out of the account and the balance is what remains. I'm like, hey, you know what? I still got $2,000. I'm going to go to my favorite bookstore, ABC Books, and buy a whole bunch of books. And so I do that. And then I remember that I have to pay rent. Do I have enough to pay rent? No. I end up with a negative amount in my checking account. And with checking accounts, that often incurs a penalty from the bank because you went over on your balance. It's called overdrawn. No! So now I have to take my books back to the store so I can pay my rent. Rob is a small business owner and he says, I have built spreadsheets for my small businesses. Assets, liabilities, sales tax, expenses, and other columns all have positives and negatives. Now, small business operation is something I am not that familiar with, but I'm going to pretend I have an ice cream business. And I have my little ice cream truck. As I'm running my business, I have assets. These are things that benefit your company. These are positive things that benefit your company. Liabilities are things that take money away from your company or could possibly take money away from something that you have to keep up with. Sales tax is a minus. Expenses are minuses. Then income is how much you make from your company from your sales. Profit and loss, well, that could be both positive and negative depending. So again, these sorts of things I'm not super familiar with. I do know that the expenses for a truck, there are gas and insurance and things like that. Inventory, you must buy more inventory, and so that's an expense. You must pay your employees, and that is also an expense. Then your income comes from your sales and possibly other sources. And your profit or loss depends on if you have more positives than you do negatives. So you do have to spend money to make money, but you don't want to spend more money than what you have coming in because then you will have a loss. Kim works at a company that makes eyeglasses, and she says in the optical world, we use negative numbers for eyeglass prescriptions. So with your eyeglass prescription, if you have a negative number in the first column, the negative number means nearsighted, and a positive number means farsighted. Wendy, a retired special education teacher, says the weather, and you know the weather is constantly changing. And the obvious one is temperature, and when the temperature falls below 0, you have negative numbers. That's pretty obvious. There are other ways in which the weather generates negative numbers, though. So you might know in the Midwest in 2024, in the fall of 2024, we had a drought. So we were actually, like in September, the average rainfall was 4.31 inches, and we didn't get any in September. So our resulting rainfall was a negative 4.31 because we were 4.31 inches below the normal. Then in October we got some rain, but how far you are above or below the average is shown with a positive or a negative number. Katie works in customer service, and she says, I utilize negative numbers while invoicing customers, especially entering credits. To customers, we must enter as a negative. Here's me running my little business, and customer 1 was charged $25. Customer 1 paid $25, so their invoice is 0. Customer 2 was charged $25. Customer 2 paid $100, so they have an invoice of negative 75. That means they have a credit of $75. Customer 3 has a charge of $25. They paid $20, so they have an invoice of positive $5. That means that they owe you $5 more. So the positives and negatives are the credits and the debits. Then we have Matt. He's an elevator enthusiast and a good friend of mine. He says, we're in a hotel right now, and the floor our room is on is at -1. To get there, we had to take an elevator up, +1, and then go down the hall, take an elevator down past 0 to -1. He goes to the hotel receptionist, which looks an awful lot like me, and he says, hey, I've got a room reserved for Matt. And she says, yes, your room is on the lower level. And he says, okay. She says, you got to do all this stuff to get to your room. And Matt says, so we got to go up a floor, go to another elevator, then go down 2 floors? She says, yep, enjoy your stay, and she leaves. He's quite excited when he finds the elevator. It's like, all right, there's the elevator. I'm going to go and hit the button. And then he waits, and he waits. Ding! The elevator arrives, and he gets on. Now it's time for the adventure of a lifetime. The elevator starts at the main level, which is floor 0. He goes up 1 floor, so +1, gets on a different elevator, and then has to go down 2 floors to get on the lower level. Then he goes to his hotel room. +1 minus 2 equals -1. Kenna, a retired teacher, says we pay a lump sum once a year to cover monthly utility bills for a cabin. Every month we receive a bill listing the amount due as a negative figure. So here's the cabin, and in order to turn the lights on, you gotta pay the bill. So let's say in January they owe $100 on the bill, and they pay $1,200. That's a lump sum for the year, because if they owe $100 for every month and they pay it all up front, that lump sum turns the lights on in January, keeps the lights on in February because they have a credit, March, lights are still on because they still have a credit, April, lights are still on because they still have a credit, and it continues throughout the year. So they have overpaid the utilities, and the company records their overpayment with a credit, listing it as a negative number. Marty is a student advisor. She says X number of students needing practicum sites minus Y number of sites offering placements equals I need to find Z more placements. And I say, persevere, Marty, you can do it. So here's what she's saying. Let's say you have 12 students that are needing a practicum placement. And a practicum just means that they need a place to go and watch people do the job that they're in school to do. And then they have so many sites that are offering placements. So let's say they have 13 sites that are saying, yeah, we'll take a student. You subtract those two, 12 minus 13. What would that be? -1. What that means is that there is going to be one site that's offering a placement that does not get a student to fill that placement. Okay, here's another example. Again, 12 students needing placements. This time we have 11 sites offering placements. We subtract 12 minus 11 and you get a +1. What does that mean? Well, it means you have one student that doesn't have a placement. That's a problem because students have to have so many hours of credit in order to receive their degree. So that's no good. And last we have Andrew. He says, I'm the manager at a pizza restaurant and I use negative numbers on a daily basis for inventory variances, seeing if we're missing or over on any specific items. So as you look at that, you might notice that there are only negative numbers in the variance column on the very end. Well, as you look around, you can see that the 6 here, the -6, probably came from the 14 and the 20. And the 14 is something that's labeled as ideal usage, where the 20 is labeled at actual usage. These are probably pizza crusts. Ideal, you should use 14 of them, but they actually used 20. You have to subtract them, and 14 minus 20 is -6. Whatever is in their inventory is now 6 less than what it usually is. And if you go down the line, you see the same thing. 17 minus 19 is -2. So their 14-inch crusts are 2 less than what they usually are. And as you continue to look down this column here, you can see that some are positive and some are negative and even have decimals. And the very last one there is the cheese. That must have been the day that I went in and ordered extra lots of cheese on my pizza because there was 10 pounds of cheese less than they usually use. This has been Beyond the Basics, a trip down when will I ever use this lane. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you in our next episode.